How's your posture? Do you have good posture?
I don't have bad posture. Everything I do is good.
Everything.
Almost everything. Mended light.
Overcoming resentment and healing emotional wounds in your marriage.
Okay, so I think resentment comes from unmet expectations.
Yeah.
And you said before that relationships, when they end because of unmet expectations. But before they end comes the resentment. You were supposed to be this for me, do this for me. We were supposed to be this, and it didn't happen, right? And that's where the resentment comes from.
You were supposed to be my knight in shining armor, and you were supposed to save me, and you didn't. I'm a princess down.
You know, I always saw you as like Xena if you're a princess.
Xena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do these expectations come from? Well, there's spoken contracts and there's unspoken contracts. The unspoken are the expectations that we carry into a relationship of what that relationship is going to be, how it's going to function, and what it's going to look like. And it may not even be communicated. In fact, it's not. That's why it's an unspoken contract.
And it could be a cognitive thought process where you just assume this is what this looks like. Or it could even be like you weren't even aware of this assumption that you made.
So I think,
or this expectation
I think
that
for
you have.
you, a lot of them were spoken. Like you'd been married before. So coming into our marriage, you said, this is what I want. This is what I expect. This is what works for me. Like you had a really formed picture.
Well, and it's not to say that was the only reason, but I am also, I'm a thinker personality type. So I evaluate everything. That is what I do. I plan and I evaluate.
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
And then I evaluate and I plan some more. And then I come up with contingency plans. This is no joke. It can be a little excessive, right? So because of my specific experiences, but also because of my nature, right? This is how it showed up for me.
From you, we had a spoken agreement and spoken contract. You said, this is what I want. And I said, absolutely. We could totally do that. Because I, as a dreamer, will not think through the 20 steps it takes to do something. I'll think through 5 steps and not even realize that there are 15 more. And so I'm like, absolutely. My unspoken ideas that I carried into our marriage, and I didn't speak them because, frankly, I wasn't even truly aware of them, is that if I was someone who did dishes and took out garbage and somebody who rubbed feet and somebody who was sweet and complimentary, the things that I saw my dad do, and that if I worked hard and was a good playmate for our children, we would have a happy relationship.
Right. If you were kind and considerate, and you checked the boxes when it came to being a provider.
And I had a checklist, and I was sticking to it. No matter how much you told me that checklist is insufficient, there are other things, there are other needs, there's more that goes into building a life together. I just was really married to these ideas. And so I just couldn't wrap my head around.
Well, I would say this is what's not working for me. Or this is, and the more I said it and the more maybe frustrated and at times angry I got, you were like, what are you talking about? I'm a good person.
Well, and I would think I'm doing my best. Like I would hear you and I would do my best to meet those needs. But to me, it's just like, well, the best is all I could do today. So why aren't you accepting it? And the reason was because it wasn't actually my best. My best would require me to be courageous enough to go into my discomfort, to leave my comfort zone. But I would say to myself, I'm working hard, so why can't you just accept that? I'm doing my best. And for you, it was about the result, the end result. Right? The kitchen floor analogy I said in a previous video. We have a son who, when it's his job to sweep the kitchen floor, I'll say, you didn't do your job. And he'll say, yes, I did. And he'll argue with me because in his mind, he got the broom out. He ran it over the floor. There's still crumbs. It's not his fault. He did the best he could. And I'm like, the job's not done, right? And it's a similar dynamic where if it's not actually yielding the results, if the job isn't done, if it's not a true partnership, then me saying, yeah, I did it, I didn't really do it.
And so there's aspects of spoken contracts and unspoken contract, and they both influence our relationships.
Yep.
So an example of like a spoken contract between you and I, and we've talked about this in other videos, but it's worth continuing to talk about, and it's because it's such a consistent theme. Like, I am a goal-driven, oriented person. Like, I accomplish my goals no matter what.
Yeah.
And for you, you're like, well, I'm trying and I'm doing my best, so that's good enough, right?
Yeah.
And that theme came up over and over again in our relationship, right?
Because in my thinking, what could possibly be better than your best, right? That's all you can do.
Yeah. Well, and for you, and this is, there's so many components, and there's so much awareness that I've gained through our relationship. What I didn't relate to was for someone like you who is a dreamer and healer, like how much discomfort is hard for you,
Yes.
right? And a lot of people relate to that, to like discomfort being hard, or they don't like it, or they avoid it, right?
Yeah.
Or your insecurities, where for me, I'm like, ooh, a new challenge.
Chance to grow.
Right. Like I genuinely need it. Like I genuinely need a mountain to climb, whatever that may look like. And so understanding for you just how hard it was to do something new, just how hard it was to lean into your discomfort, how hard it was to lean into your insecurity. And for you, it had become a coping mechanism to avoid the things that were uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? And I realized for us to be a partnership and to have the life that I wanted and to achieve the goals that I wanted, like these were the ways you were going to have to grow. And the same thing for me, right?
Yeah.
The difference was I saw that much sooner for myself, and I
Put in the work.
I leaned into it, right? And so then there was a wound of like, hey, I've been doing the hard thing for me. I've been doing it for 10 years, and at times I've been doing it to the extent of self-betrayal. Right? That was like a red flag for myself. I needed to learn. Showing up this way in my life to the extent of self-betrayal, is that serving me? Is that helping me? Is that supporting me? No, it wasn't. I needed to take responsibility for that and make a different choice if what I wanted was a different outcome. And so there was absolutely a wound that I was so busy focusing on my own growth that I didn't see what this discomfort looked like for you.
Yeah.
Right? And then once I saw it, like I understood it, I had empathy for it. But then there was a wound on top of that I was like, I've been showing up for you to the best of my ability. Granted, the best of my ability was really crappy sometimes, and sometimes it looked like yelling, right? I'd been showing up for you that way, and you hadn't been showing up for me that way. And then what was really underneath that wound for me, because I realized why I had been self-sacrificing to that extent, I thought, well, maybe if I loved you enough, maybe I self-sacrificed for you enough, you would love me back.
Yeah. Well, and the hard thing for me, speaking of paradigm shifts, is if you had told me a few years ago that I didn't love you, I would have fought you on it. In fact, you did, and I did.
Don't be stupid, you know I love you. Don't be ridiculous, you know I need you.
Because I was like, what are you even talking about? Of course I love you. Of course I care about you. Of course I adore you. But I realize now that there's a difference between love and attachment, or between love and even affection. That love requires self-sacrifice. Love requires the courage to go into your discomfort and to grow for the other person. And we're not talking about fundamentally changing who you are for the other person. We're talking about expanding who you are for the other person, turning weaknesses into strengths. And that was something that you had done for me.
Right.
And that was love. And what I had for you was genuine affection.
Right.
And genuine respect and attachment. Like I didn't want to lose you, and I wanted you in my life. But for it to be love, it had to have that component. And it was lacking.
And so becoming aware of that dynamic, it absolutely caused resentment. It caused emotional wounds.
Yeah.
And so how do you overcome that resentment? And another conversation we would have pretty regularly, even though the outcome was what it was, for certain dynamics in our relationship. Because there's certain dynamics in our relationship that worked really well, right? Which I think everybody can relate to. And then there was the other ones that were just like the roadblocks again and again and again.
So to the topic of overcoming resentment, I think there needs to be a component of honoring each other's agency and free will. That it may be justified to feel resentment for this person, but it doesn't bring peace. And I think I was, quote unquote, justified in feeling hurt by your anger and some of the ways that you talk to me. And you were definitely justified in feeling resentment and hurt and anger for the choices that I had made. But
Right.
was that resentment going to bring peace? Right? Are you looking for justice, retribution, revenge, or are you looking for peace? And the path to peace for us looked like honoring, okay, these are the choices that you made, right? Especially you to me. These are the choices that you made. These are the choices that you're making. And I will honor that instead of holding on to anger and resentment. And you did that by saying to me, you don't have to change. You're fine the way you are. But if we're going to have a partnership, these are the things I need from you. And they are changes.
The future has to look different from the past.
Future, and if you're not willing to make those changes, or if you're not able to make those changes, that's okay. Like, we don't have to have resentment or hurt feelings. We can just call a spade a spade.
You can say, here's what I want out of my life, and I can say, here's what I want out of my life.
Right.
And there's not enough of an overlap.
And I think a huge part of overcoming resentment, especially when you feel someone has wronged you, or they legitimately, undisputably have wronged you, is recognizing people are going to make their choices. And I can have peace in honoring that and saying, you can do whatever you want to do. I'm going to tell you what works for me, and I'm going to draw that line.
Well, and there's the tool of radical acceptance, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it just is what it is. The situation is what it is. Like, we could absolutely backtrack and keep score and place blame or find fault, but what is that going to achieve, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we are where we're at, and we need to be aware, to the extent it serves and helps us heal, how we got here, right?
Yeah.
And so those are the components that we're talking about. Like, these were the insecurities that you had. These were the wounds that I had. This is how they played together. And frankly, this is how they like rubbed up against each other.
Non-serving, unhealthy way.
Well, to cause hurt. It
Yeah.
caused hurt for you. It caused hurt for me.
And that's, when we resent somebody, it's because we feel like we lost something, or that someone has wronged us or taken advantage of us. And this is the way to work through it.
So applying this conversation to your own life is, how am I showing up in my life in a way that's not serving me and not supporting me? Some people call it shadow work. You can call it blind spots. You can call it whatever you want, right? There's components of how we show up in our own life that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
And what I was doing is I was living in a false paradigm of, well, it's either meeting my husband's and my family's needs, or it's meeting my own needs, because they're so drastically different.
Yeah.
And what it really needed to be was an and. And then I went deeper and I realized, hey, there's all sorts of ways in my life how I betray myself.
Yeah.
And where does that self-betrayal come from? And why do I do it? And then I looked deeper and I said, well, I felt like if I loved someone enough, even to this extent of self-betrayal, maybe they will love me back. And maybe at that point, I will be lovable.
And that belief and that pursuit wasn't serving you, and you had to change it up. And what wasn't serving me was hiding from the things I was afraid of, and hiding from, frankly, I had a lot of self-loathing, and loving myself enough to say, this isn't who I want to be. And that actually led to being able to love you, because it wasn't serving you or serving us for me to live in fear. It wasn't serving you or serving us for me to live in what my comfort zone was. And I'll be honest, it's been rough. To face those demons and to make those changes has not been easy. But the dividends in our connection, like, no matter where this goes, like, we have such a healthier dynamic than we had in the past. And for me to look myself in the mirror and to not say I hate you, in my mind when I saw that face, to look myself in the mirror and say, I like that guy, is a big deal. And that's helped me to let go of any resentment, right? To acknowledge, okay, she treated me this way and I didn't like it and it hurt. And to acknowledge the hand I had in creating that, and also the ways that I've hurt her, and to put that in the past.
Well, and it's so interesting that we both brought up the concept of loving ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And yours manifested differently than mine, right? But ultimately, the core wound is we wanted to be loved. And we didn't feel like we were innately worthy of that love. And we felt like we needed to do things to get that love, or we needed to protect from losing it. And none of those things are actually real love, right?
Right.
And the solution for both of us was to say, I am innately worthy of love, and I do love myself. And whether this person chooses to show up in my life differently and actually show me unconditional love doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, I would really like that. I
Yeah.
would really like to be in a healthy partnership. But to do that, we first have to show up and be honest about our own wounds.
And who we are.
Yeah.
You sacrificed to get love, right?
Yeah.
And I was dishonest and self-serving to protect myself from wounds from my past of not getting love, or believing that if you truly saw me, you wouldn't love me.
Right. Because that was the deep fear.
That was the deep fear.
Right. So you were like, I have to pretend, I have to hide.
Yeah.
And sometimes I tell white lies to make myself be perceived a certain way.
And so the question for you to ask yourselves at home, gentle viewer, is, are you currently putting anything or anyone before your spouse? And that isn't to say you don't take care of your own needs or even take care of your own needs first. So maybe it's not even before your spouse, but instead of, right? Or does your spouse or your partner get the leftovers? Because that's what I was guilty of. I definitely showed up, and there were ways that I showed up in our marriage that were good things, but Alicia got the leftovers, right? And what I was doing wasn't even good self-care. It was just selfishness and fear.
Your insecurities and your discomfort came before anything else.
And on your end, the imbalance or the lack of harmony was not looking after yourself.
Right, right. So
go
my
ahead.
question is, are you currently putting anything on your spouse? Like for me, I could have said, here's all the ways I sacrifice for you, and I cannot believe you treated me this way. And I could have victimized myself through
Yeah.
my own self-betrayal, instead of owning the fact that, hey, this is the way I show up, and this is the way I allow myself to be treated.
Yeah. And this is how I put myself on the back burner
Right.
instead of saying, no, this is what I need. What from today did you find most helpful? Let us know in the comments below. How have you worked through, or how are you working through resentment and emotional wounds in your relationship? We'd love to have you learn from one another, and we learn from you, so please sound off. If you've enjoyed this video, we've got a whole list of marriage problems videos where we get raw and real and open and share what we've been through, hoping that you will find it beneficial. Until next time, folks, keep shining. We need your light.